Happy Thursday, everybody. It is April 4th, 2024, and the Gamecocks have wrapped up practice number 7 of the spring, which means we are essentially at the midway point of spring practices because the Gamecocks will have 7 more, and then they'll also have that spring game, which counts as a spring practice to wrap things up on April 20th. So just over 2 weeks away until the spring game. The Gamecocks will be holding their first inter-squad scrimmage on Saturday. We won't be able to be there. We'd love to be there. I'd love to be able to get some insight as to what's going on. But myself, Wes, Chris will be able to catch up with the people that were able to attend because it's closed off to a limited amount of people. They'll actually have the ladies' clinic for Beamer taking place this week. I think they get access. So maybe I'll have to pick some brains of some of the people that were there as well. 3 assistant coaches spoke today. Those coaches included offensive lineman Lonnie Teasley, edge coach Sterling Lucas, as well as defensive tackle coach Travian Robertson. So we will hear from them shortly as the Gamecocks hopefully will have that audio posted for us during our show, so we'll be able to share it with you. We will at least be able to highlight some of the things that were said, but as we do each week, we love to be able to show you guys some audio. And if that's not the case, we'll go back. We'll listen to some of the things that Shane Beamer had to say earlier in the week. He spoke with the media on Tuesday. No players this week, but plenty of sound from the last couple weeks. So if we have to, we'll get creative to be able to give you guys some audio in there as well. In the meantime, though, I want to begin today's show with a way that we typically would do things during the regular season, and that's with some of the things I like to mention on Quick Slants. If you're not familiar with Quick Slants are, head on over to the Gamecock Central page, sign up for your first month for just $1, and you'll be able to access all the premium content on Gamecock Central. Of course, football season, it is never over, right? There's always football going on year-round when you're talking about being in the state of South Carolina. But, of course, with women's basketball preparing for another Final Four run, the Gamecocks will be in action tomorrow. Shout out to Dawn Staley for winning another National Coach of the Year award, not just yesterday, but today as well. Naismith yesterday, today Associated Press. Gamecocks trying to get back to the finals, which would be on Sunday if they're able to beat NC State tomorrow, trying to win their 3rd championship in program history. But back to football as we roll things on here on this Thursday. A couple things that I talked about today. A couple things I talked about on Quick Slants that have stood out to me through these first couple press conferences this spring. The first is that the new faces in that wide receiver room, a trio of transfers, and then you also have 2 true freshmen coming in. New faces are really starting to stand out in that wide receiver room. And as I've said many times before when it comes to spring practices, it's way too early to get too excited about players, right? But at the same time, too, when you're looking at a room like this, where there's just so many unknowns, any early signs of progress, you're going to welcome that. And I say that about transfers in particular, as well as freshmen. Because when you have a transfer come over, regardless of where they came from, they could come from a Power 5 school. How do they fit in your scheme? How do they fit in your system? How do they fit with the guys around them? So that's why, I pump the brakes a little bit when we talk about transfers right away, as well as freshmen. And, it's not just limited to the wide receiver room. We talked about this with Dylan Stort the other day. 5-star player, one of the most highly touted recruits for the class of 2024. As I've said before, even though there's been some good reviews so far, simmer down a little bit. Simmer down. Keep the pants on. It's only the friggin' spring. Slow down. But it's always good to be able to hear good progress being made because that's not always the case. There's sometimes we go through spring and we hardly hear about a player. And that doesn't mean come fall, they're not going to do good things. But to be able to come in here, again, whether it be as a transfer, whether it be as a true freshman, and to be able to start to stand out in a short period of time. We wrote this story before today's practice So we're talking about through 6 practices. And these are some of the guys that I talked about. Number 1, Gage Laverdine. Gage coming in from Miami of Ohio, and he's quickly making his presence known. I feel like through the first couple press conferences we've heard this spring before today, whether it be from new wide receiver coach Mike Furry, whether it be from Shane Beamer, whether it be from some of the players, Gage is a name that continues to come up. Now, I've been very high on Jared Brown. And that's not to say Jared Brown's name isn't popping up. But from what we continue to hear in these press conferences, what I continue to hear from talking to people behind the scenes and how some of those practices are going, because the media, we've only been able to attend, I think, 2 practices, 6 periods for each. So you're looking at 12 periods, and a lot of those periods that we've been at are either special teams periods, ball protection drill periods. We're not really seeing a lot of 11 on 11. There's been situational football that we've seen, but it's been very limited. And it was early on in camp, so we don't get a lot that we can take away from those periods. So with Gage, and this is a quote that Beamer said earlier this week, quote, "I would say Gage is somebody that every day I've noticed for something, whether it is being able to get a great release off the line of scrimmage or catch and run." So again, we're in the spring. No one's saying, woo, everything's all sunshine. No one's saying that. But being able to get progress, make progress, early progress in positions that you have some unknowns at. And certainly wide receivers, one of them. When you talk about returning wide receivers for this program, we've done this many times. We've talked about this offseason many times. Luke Doty and Nick Harbor are your most productive returning wide receivers from a year ago. Doty had 13 catches, and then you had Nick Harbor with 12. Intern Joe's joining us today.
Yeah.
Intern Joe, good to have you here, man. What a surprise. It was always
absolutely
good.
Hey, Mike, you usually do the Thursday show by yourself, and obviously I was at the pressers today. We heard from Sterling Lucas, Travion Robertson, and then Lonnie Teasley today. I was able to make it out to those pressers today. The Gamecocks Online is getting ready to post those. I haven't gotten them up yet, but
Intern Joe's going to help us out with those videos so we can be able to hear from some of those coaches. So appreciate that, Joe. Yeah, some of the things that I was – Joe, some of the things that we were just talking about, not sure how much you had a chance to hear, talking about, and I think, Darius, you take the name that I'm going to bring up next, sharing some of the names. I post this today on Quick Slants. Some of the things that have stood out to me in these press conferences and from conversations with people I've had behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Gage Laverdine is one name that continues to come up, it feels like. But 2 other names. One, Mazio Bennett, as Darius alluded to. But in addition to that, another name, and this is one of the other names I mentioned in the story today, is DeBron Gatling. And this is one of the comments that Mike Furry said, quote, "After practices 4 and 5, Bennett and Gatling have really sunk in. I wouldn't say those guys are freshmen anymore. I'm impressed with their turnaround for their youth, but both of those guys have a very, very high meter of competitiveness. They have a high care factor, and it's allowed those guys to jump in fast and show that they belong here." I've been highly pleased with both of those guys. So I bring that up because, look, when you look at the guys that South Carolina has coming back, and I've mentioned this many times this offseason, Tyson Russell, that is a guy that I am very excited to see what he can do from a growth standpoint. Very excited. We know, obviously, Nick Harbor, he's doing track and field this spring. He's continuing to come over in the ops building as best he can, whenever he can, to not only get those mental reps, but to sitting in meetings. If you're interested in that story, head on over to Gamecock Central. I just wrote about that yesterday. Some great quotes from Shane Beamer and how Harbor, despite setting personal best already as a true freshman for track and field, he continues to show how badly he wants to grow as a football player. And in one of these cases, I think, Joe, you mentioned it on Tuesday, there's cases where some players, and this isn't just limited to South Carolina, some players want to do both. They want to be a football player. They want to run track and field. They want to do both. And that's not just limited to track and field. You could see this with football players that play basketball as well. In this case, though, this isn't a guy that is just on the team that is running in the middle of the pack. Like, this is a guy that's running and finishing towards the front. The Florida relay they just had this past weekend, he finished second in the 200 meter. He won the 100 meter a couple weeks ago. So this is a guy that's making an impact, but he continues to be around the program. But going back to what we were saying, Joe, Gage Larverdane, Mazio Bennett, DeBron Gatling, we've mentioned this before. I said it a little bit earlier in the program. When it comes to transfers, when it comes to freshmen, simmer the expectations right away. But again, in a room that there's just so many unknowns, to hear progress like this, and we've talked about Mazio in the back and how I feel like he's very polished for a guy coming out of high school. There's a lot of things that you watch with his routes and you say in high school and say, man, this guy, he understands what he's doing. He's not just running out there and using his athleticism. He's running out there using his athleticism, but more importantly, he's doing it with a purpose. He understands every cut, every move that he makes. And that's the difference when we're talking about high school receivers in comparison to college more times than not.
Yeah, absolutely. Threw a lot at me there, Mike. But so I'll start with DeBron and Mazio, right? I think those two guys, and then William brings up Oscar Attaway too, and Mr. Attaway is here, so appreciate him joining us as always. But yeah, starting with Mazio and DeBron, two really, really athletic freshmen, right? And Mazio, one of his best qualities is his ability to go compete, right? Really good kid, knows when to hit the switch and turn things on when he needs to. And his competition level has been really impressive from everything that we've heard, right? So that's exactly what you need, especially when you're, a guy like Mazio, going to rely on his size or on his skill a little bit than his size, but just, you need to get up there and show up and show you can compete. And I think that's, a really good thing for Mazio that he's done it so far. And he's able to run real well. DeBron, similar, but with a little bit more size, can get to the outside. So eyes on those two guys, and then Gage Larverdane as well. I've been really high up on him. I thought he was going to make an impact before he got here, when we were sifting out this portal class and, take an aim at a dartboard, Mike, I said, right, we got all those names in that wide receiver room. It's like, who's going to start, who's going to play well. Larverdane was my guy, and it's good to hear that he's coming along. I expect to see him progress. And then on Harbor, Mike, we talked about it a lot on Tuesday, but really, really good stuff out of Harbor. And the fact that he's continuing to progress is why you let him continue and pursue back. Because, again, to have somebody, he's on pace currently, at least, it's still looking a little far ahead, but to possibly 10 spot on the Olympic team. And think about how an awesome of an ambassador he would be for your program, your school, to potentially be running in the Olympics. So that's a dream of his, obviously. It's a really good one. I'm happy that Shane Beamer is letting him pursue that. And then it doesn't seem like he's missing a step necessarily with ball. The fact that, him and Lenoris are working extra on the stuff that, he really needs to work on and just kind of the extra stuff that he can be at football is big, because, track it's helping his explosiveness. It does translate. And now there's a couple, tweaks here, there with positioning and stuff, obviously as a wide receiver, but I think it's beneficial. And, if it ever gets to a point where he's plateauing or they feel that it's not helping football, they'll pull him out of track. But as so far, so good, right? He's continuing to climb up the ranks and continuing to make progress for track.
Yeah. It's easy to sit here and say, well, if he was just focusing on football, he would be a better football player this upcoming year. I get that argument, because when you look at it at face value, that makes sense, right? But it's not like he's not in the building. It's not like he's going out there twice a week when he has the opportunity to, on his own, mind you, to be able to catch with Sellers. It's not like he's the only player that's not practicing this spring for one reason or another. We've talked about this before with other reasons for some of these players. And I use Rocket Sanders for an example. And this isn't a shot at Rocket. Bottom line is the guy's coming back from an injury, had surgery. We knew what the plan was for him when he arrived at South Carolina. But Rocket Sanders can't practice this spring. If anything, Harbor's getting more work done than a guy like Rocket, than a guy like Juju, who re-aggravated his collarbone. The guys that are injured, that are going through the process of healing. He's at least staying active this spring. So, again, I bring that up simply to say it's real easy to look at the situation at face value and say, well, you should be out there at football. If he struggles this year, yeah, we can look at that. But I think it's really premature. And some people are going to look back to last season and be like, well, he didn't have the phenomenal. He was a friggin' freshman. Some of you people out there think this is a friggin' video game, that someone just shows up day one and they're going to put up crazy numbers just because they had a number of stupid stars next to their name coming out of high school. That's not how the real world works. There's going to be outliers, sure. There will be some freshmen that come out and they're ready to go right from the get-go. No question about it. However, and if you go back and you look at, Spencer Rattler, for crying out loud, he redshirted. There are players that it's going to take them time. It's certainly for a player like Harbor, who is making the transition from one position, playing tight end in high school, to playing wide receiver. Of course, he also played defensive end in high school. But I bring that up to say, slow down before you start jumping down this kid's throat. Give him an opportunity to see if he can juggle things. And it looks like so far from talking with the coaches, we've heard from the press conferences, they're pleased with how he's handling things. If anything, he's going the extra mile to put the work in. Or as someone mentioned to me, well, he doesn't run miles. Yeah, he's going the extra 200 meters. You like that? Better for a track analogy. Yeah, exactly. He's going the extra distance to put the work in. All right, having said that, and William, you brought up a good point. Leggett was a good example. He would stay after practice, and I think there were some days beforehand too, that he would hit the jugs machine with Xavier Leggett. And Leggett really instilled a work ethic into him. And I don't want to say that he didn't have a work ethic before, but there's a difference when you go from high school to college. You're on your own now, right? Mommy and daddy, they're not there anymore. You have to be able to go out there, and certainly in the case that he's in right now, juggling two sports, you're going to have to make sacrifices that not a lot of either your friends or even some of your teammates will understand when you're juggling two sports. So good point, William. Glad you brought that up. Speaking about brought up, looks like Joe was able to get Sterling Lucas on the board for us. And there was a couple of things that stood out to me today, Joe, about Sterling. I think the biggest things, and we're going to hear from him shortly, he's excited about the depth. He's excited about the experience. And as we've mentioned before, I don't care how talented the back end is on a defense. If you don't have pressure, up front from your edge room, from your defensive tackle room, if you don't have pressure on the quarterback, then it doesn't matter who the heck's in the backfield as far as your defensive backs. So when you look at South Carolina going through competition right now in that cornerback room, we know that they obviously have a lot of experience in that safety room and guys that have all won freshman All-American honors at safety at one point in their career. There's a lot of talent there. And that's not to say that Judge Collier or Vicari Swain, they're not going to be able to do a good job across from O.D. Fortune at corner. But there's going to be pressure for one of those guys. And if you don't think these teams, especially in the SEC, are going to come out right away and challenge whoever the heck is at that cornerback position, knowing that you have a young guy, then you're absolutely crazy. So how can you help those young guys out? Well, number one, the other defensive backs do their job. But number two, you put pressure on up front. So here's a little bit of what Sterling Lucas had to say today. Looks like we're having some audio issues, not hearing anything yet, Joe. But what I'll try to do is I'll try to pull it up from my end. Good to know that they're up there right now.
Yeah, a little difficulties on my end. I'll try to download it and pull it and find some clips here for you.
All good. But we'll get to Sterling Lucas in just a moment, folks. Sterling actually opened up with a statement. I mean, that's when you know this guy's ready to go. So let's share. Let's give it a go. And here's Sterling Lucas from today.
Practice 7 today. The guys are getting after it, practicing really hard. Really pleased with these guys are. have a lot of increased depth in the edge room, a lot of experience. Adding Kyle Kennard, JT Gear, BT, all those guys, experienced guys. Gilbert Edmonds back. So really pleased with those guys are. A lot of competition, which is a core value in our program. Want to give a quick shout out to our women's basketball team. Shout out to them. Final Four, undefeated season, heck of a season. Also want to give a little, shout out to my alma mater, North Carolina State, the Wolfpack, women's and men's making the Final Four. So, just shout out to those teams. Any questions?
Coach, obviously you brought up Kyle Kennard. You're bringing in a couple veterans to mix in with some of these freshmen like Dylan Stewart. What are you seeing from the dynamic in your room? And then also what are you seeing from a kid like Dylan?
Yeah, the dynamic is great. You mentioned, like I said, Kyle Kennard, we're encouraging him to, bring his experience, sharing that knowledge and that wisdom with some of the young guys, having played a lot of years at Georgia Tech. So really, really happy with that. And then Dylan, man, I mean, he's as advertised. Obviously the pace is, a little different for him in terms of, college football, which is expected. But we're really pleased where he is.
I won't ask you who you think's going to win this week, and don't want to upset the Gamecock fans since NC State's playing them.
That's a conflict of interest, man. But I'm gonna just say the Gamecock women's basketball team, they've been doing it. They've been doing it, man. Under Coach Staley.
I'm not going to ask you that.
Right.
But, you mentioned the experience in that room and just the depth, especially with guys that have been able to play at this level. What can that do for an edge room in particular to be able to put more pressure on, be able to have fresher legs, especially when you look back to last season, maybe when you got into the fourth quarter, some of the guys up front, not just the edge room, but it seemed like sometimes it would have been nicer to have, fresher bodies.
Absolutely, man. I mean, we want to treat that thing like hockey shifts, right? With the increased depth, like you said, having fresh legs, and once we get to the fourth quarter, that's only gonna help us.
When as a defense, y'all are bouncing back and forth between the 4-down and the 3-down stuff. How does that change things for you, or does it change things for you and Traven, and how you guys are coaching and teaching your guys, and just sort of the whole dynamic that comes with that?
So it doesn't change a lot. I know, like Coach White mentioned to you guys, we're a flex nickel defense, and just that being multiple is awesome. We have guys we can move them around in a lot of different spots. A guy like Goosey. I don't know, Elijah Davis. I don't know if I gave y'all a little nugget there. I didn't know his nickname was Goosey, right? Elijah Davis. He's a guy who was a defensive tackle. Right now he's in the edge room, so we're able to move him around in different spots. And like I said, I mean, it's great to be multiple, and love T-Rob, man. We work great together. We do a lot of things together, man. Love T-Rob, and I expect our guys to dominate up front this year.
Obviously, Desmond was a guy who flashed last year as a freshman. What have you seen from him so far through spring practice?
Yeah, Des is doing a good job. He, the biggest thing about Desmond is his length. He has great length. He's a 6'6" guy, long arms. In the SEC, you need that length. So Desmond he's doing a really good job with him, just emphasizing, get off in the pass rush. As the year went along last year, he was able to continue to get better in his pass rush, get better on his get off. And for him, I just keep challenging him to, gain some extra weight, right? I see him as a long limb guy who I feel like he can hold 265. So that's my challenge. So Des, you listening, man, I'm still challenging you. 265 by the season, big dog.
What has Gilbert brought since coming back and having the experience of being at South Carolina, but then leaving and coming back?
Yeah, so obviously Gilbert transferred this past year, and that just says a lot about him coming back and just the culture. Him willing to come back to this culture. So what I would say, when he bought, they played an undefeated. He played an undefeated team last year, so he was able to gain some experience, and just for him, man, I really just like his effort. We talk about leading the SEC in effort in our room, and he's been showing that, and the guys really respect him because he came in and he just went straight back to work.
All right, there you go. Edge coach Sterling Lucas speaking today about the progress of the edge room through 7 practices. Joey mentioned some things off the top, but anything that stood out to you about what he had to say today?
Yeah, absolutely. There were a couple things, right? I think, preaching league to league and effort. I loved that. I think that was really good. And especially at a room like Edge, that was one thing that stood out because it's one of the positions where, you really have to give your all on, every play, whether you're going to get to the quarterback or whether you're not. It needs to be a consistent effort. And so, going from that, the hot shifts, I thought was another thing too, because as we know, right, Mike, being from the North, we know all about hockey and how short hockey shifts are. And so having a platoon, and then also I think it's a good sign that, he wants to rotate that much, because what does that tell us, right? It tells us that the depth is good enough to do that, right? There's enough dudes in that room that I like Sterling Lucas, who spent 6 years in the NFL, is confident in doing short shifts and just rotating guys. That should, give fans a lot of confidence in the room. And there's one question that I asked him later on in the presser and stuff about just Kyle Kennard. And he gave us a master class on just rushing the passer and what it's like for a guy with that much experience. And it's kind of a long-winded answer, so it was good that we didn't necessarily hit on it, Mike. But it's really good if you guys want to go back, check that out. But yeah, a lot of some stuff from Coach Lucas, and I think he's a right guy preaching the defensive ends just to get mean, and I like the philosophy.
So I wrote a story earlier in the week about Dylan Stewart, and as I've mentioned before, and I'll say it again, I'm seeing some of the comments. I think some of you have realistic expectations and some of you don't. But as talented as Dylan Stewart is, even though he's a 5-star coming out of high school, it's going to the SEC, right? So simmer the expectations when you have a freshman come in. I expect, and I've said this many times already, but I expect a guy like Dylan Stewart, even in a very talented, experienced, and deep edge room, he'll continue to see more playing time as the season goes on. He's just too talented. And I feel like coming in now, being able to work in the spring, being able to pick up some of the techniques, being able to understand what they're trying to do schematically, and understanding what his role is only going to help him, so that once they get into fall camp, he's going to be able to play at a much faster pace. He's not going to have to think as much. The little things that just naturally happen when you're making that jump from high school to college, especially, again, in the SEC. So I say that because when you look at that room, and I wrote about this earlier this week, when you look at what that room has right now from a scholarship standpoint, we're talking about Brian Thomas Jr., we're talking about Desmond Zulu, we're talking about Elijah Davis, we're talking about Jaiteus Gear, we're talking about Kyle Kennard, we're talking about Gilmer Edmond. When you combine those 6 players, they have appeared in 63 games last season. 63 games when you look at that 6. That's an average of what? 10 a game? 10 games per player? When you look at that, just over that mark. So when you look at that, and obviously not every one of those players, you look at Kennard, you look at Edmond, they played at different schools last season. But the point being is there's a lot of experience in that room. And there's a lot of production, too, from what some of these guys did last season. I mean, even a guy like Zulu, he appeared in all 12 games, didn't play maybe as much in comparison to a guy like Kennard or an Edmond or Thomas, who I think can be an absolute stud next year for the Gamecocks. But he was able to go out there and see some things that now you go back in the spring. Now you're able to take a step back and you're able to say, hey, I've gained some knowledge as far as when I see this certain package, when I see a guy do this, when I see a tackle make this move or a tight end, depending on if the tight end is blocking down, I can understand concepts now better, so that when I go out there, I'm not going to have to play as slow. I'm going to be able to play faster. And that's what it comes down to more than anything at this level. So I think that's one thing, too. When we talk about Dylan Stewart, kid could be an absolute stud. How quickly is he going to be able to get to that level where they feel comfortable enough about putting him out there for whatever X amount of snaps or playing more, especially when you look at this room, knowing there's a lot of experience.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love it, Mike. I think, Dylan Stewart certainly looks the part, right? And I think, in terms of a raw talent standpoint, exactly what they wanted and showed up, like a block of clay, right? When it shows up to the artist's doorstep, right? And now this coaching staff to mold, a defensive end that's, a 5-star kid, a lot of potential. And, they're taking it slow with him in the spring, as you should. And I think it's, for benefit, because we heard Lonnie Teasley talking about Tree and Tro, right? How they didn't have a spring. And so they kind of had to, ramp things up as soon as they got here. I think it's really beneficial for Dylan to have the spring and, have the game slow down a little bit in the spring before they really start ramping them up and, having, loftier expectations for him if playing time is in the future. And I think at some point we will see Dylan Stewart, whether that be, at edge, we could see him on the defensive or, in attack, like on a nose position as well. So kind of just depends. But I think, you brought up Dylan Stewart, you brought up Brian Thomas as well. The Kyle Kennards, and the kind of the transfers help the Brian Thomases and the JT Gears as well, because those are guys that know what Coach Lucas wants, know what Coach White wants, and so they're ready to take that next step. And so when you bring in experience and guys who have seen different ways to rush the passer and things like Kyle Kennard has, they're going to take your veteran players or the guys that have had experience already and take them to a whole nother level. Like it goes beyond just mentoring the new guy. It takes the vets to a different level as well. Oh, Mike, there was one more thing too. I did want to add. Yeah, absolutely. So this comment from Martin, right? I think this one of the biggest parts of Coach Lucas as well. I did want to squeeze this in here, but really, really darn good recruiter. And we were talking about it afterwards, Mike. I told you, I turned around. I'm like, I would play for him, like walking on whatever it may be. So definitely another good point out with Coach Lucas.
And one thing in particular about Lucas, there's a reason why South Carolina made sure this offseason to pay him more. And when you look at Sterling Lucas, I think there were some people that were worried when he came here because they're like, well, can he recruit? Can he recruit? Doesn't have the experience. And then what does he do? He comes in and he's arguably one of South Carolina's best recruiters. Arguably, and that's not a slap in the face of the other coaches, but let's just call it for what it is. He played a big role as to why not only Nicholas Harbor's here, but also Dylan Stewart. And he's been able to recruit some other talented players, too, that weren't just 5 stars. We're talking Desmond Umeozulu. We're talking about being able to bring in a transfer like Kyle Kennard. And we could keep going down the list. So
yeah, it's ridiculous, Mike.
He's done a phenomenal job. You brought up something that I think is so important, and we're going to listen to Lonnie Teasley in a moment, offensive line coach for the Gamecocks. You brought up something that Teasley mentioned today about Baugh as well as Big Tree, that those two guys didn't have an opportunity to go through spring practices. Some players, some freshmen, they enroll early. Some players opt not to for one reason or another. Sometimes it's just because they can't, depending on what school they're at. That's why Dante Reno transferred high schools last year so that he could go to a different high school so that he could enroll early. I bring that up because when you look at some of those players and we talk about the development part, and some guys are able to go in quicker than others, right? When you don't have that part, when you don't have that opportunity to go through those 15 practices, that's why it's not apples to apples, but we talk about why coaches really enjoy more than anything, especially when they're playing in maybe like, the Tic Tac Bowl or whatever, when they play in some of these smaller bowl games, some of these bowl games that might not be as exciting for fans to travel to, they still enjoy it because they get the extra practices. So I bring that up because let's move ahead now. Now we're in the spring. You might have transfers come in. You might have players that are early enrollees as freshmen, and now they have an opportunity to go out there and they are able to get extra practices in. They're able to start to understand the concepts, so things start to slow down for them. How valuable do you think it would have been for a guy like Tree or Trevon Baugh to be able to get here earlier last year? I'm sure it would have been extremely valuable. They did great things last year as true freshmen, but there's things, as Teasley mentioned, we'll hear from him again shortly, that when you're in the middle of the season, and I've gone through this as a college player, when you're in the middle of the season, you don't have time to slow down and really teach the technique week to week like you would do in preseason camp, and certainly like you do in the spring. That's not to say the energy, that's not to say the tempo, that's not to say the way you operate in spring is, Camp Candyland, for crying out loud. That's not the case, but you're able to slow things down. You're able to really help some of these players understand the why It's not just, okay, this is why we're doing, we're doing this. Why are we doing this? Just like in the classroom. It could be doing math. It could be doing whatever the heck it is. Chemistry. Why are we doing it? This is why we do this. And you're able to help that student. On the football field, it's the same deal. You only have X amount of minutes in that meeting room. You only have X amount of minutes when you're working in what we call indie period, which is individual period. You only have X amount of minutes. So move ahead now to the season. That's even more crunched because now you're not able to focus as much on yourself. You're having to focus on preparing for the upcoming opponent. So I think it's going to be extremely valuable for not only the offensive line that we're going to talk more about shortly with Teasley, but for just freshmen in general, the transfers coming in, the guys that were freshmen last year who maybe they didn't have the opportunity to go through spring. It's going to be extremely valuable. So I'm glad you brought that up, Joe. All right. That was Sterling Lucas. This is Lonnie Teasley. Good things today from both coaches. We'll also hear from Travian Robertson in a little bit. But here is what Lonnie Teasley had to say today.
How's it going, Lonnie? Obviously, last year you guys struggled offensively on the line, giving up a ton of sacks, and the run game wasn't particularly great. What are you guys doing in the early parts of practice to kind of, try to start fixing those issues?
Working on techniques and fundamentals. Like there's no secret to why things happen. Usually boils down to those two things. So you coach them better and you get those results.
This spring, what are you doing with your guys as far as mixing and matching positions? Is that an emphasis, or are you trying to focus in on certain guys at certain spots? How's that sort of working for you?
During the spring, I try to mix and match as much as possible. So we've been playing with a lot of different rotations, and we pretty much switch it up every day. There's been a few guys who play more at one position, but they're playing a lot of different positions.
Hey, Coach, you've got a lot of really talented freshmen in this room now.
Mm-hmm.
How are they performing so far in spring ball? And then what else are your expectations for them going forward?
I've been pleased with the freshmen who just got here. They should be still in high school. But what they have done is they work really hard to learn, one, what we're asking from the techniques and fundamentals, and now they got to put that together with the playbook. And those guys do extra work. They come in because they want to be good. So they've been working really hard at it, really pleased with that group.
Lonnie, obviously there's things that you guys couldn't control last year, and I know you would be the last person to make any excuses up when it comes to injuries. But what did last year teach you, and maybe teach some of these players as you guys, try to move on from last season?
Yeah. Biggest thing it taught me was build depth. So like spring ball and what Hell just asked, that's why we're stressing guys to learn different positions. We got to build depth. You got to have enough depth in the room when those injuries happen where you don't miss a beat. So that's the biggest thing is building depth, and everybody's got to understand you're one play away. If you're in that too deep, you're one play away.
With Josiah in particular, how has he come along in these first 6 or 7 practices? How many have y'all done?
Yeah. Josiah's been doing really good. He's got real he's really gifted mover. He's a really gifted mover. So that stuff comes natural to him. And then what he's really done a really good job of is getting in the weight room and getting with Yemi and Luke and adding the bulk to his frame. So he's done a good job with football, with the nutrition, the weight room, just becoming that complete player. But he's doing really good. We're happy we have him.
Hey, Lonnie, three transfers coming in that most people haven't seen. Can you kind of give us a breakdown on, Torricelli, Aaron, and Kamar?
Yep. So Torricelli, it's another guy who's playing multiple positions. Again, trying to build depth, but he's doing well. He's got to learn, one, he plays one of his positions is center, so he's got a lot he's got to do as far as up front with the ID, so he's got a lot to learn, but he's been grasping everything pretty well. Been seeing steps from him every day. Aaron is a guy, again, he's got to go left to right, playing different positions, and he's been doing that well, playing tackle. He's got really good feet, and we've just been stressing him to keep improving on the other things. And then Kamar he's like, that's another guy. And again, all these guys, when I recruited him, told him, hey, you're gonna have to play multiple positions. So Kamar, he goes from right to left, left to right, and he plays center too. So he plays the guards, he plays the center, and he's doing a good job of it.
Lonnie, when you look at the guys that were either here last year, even some of the guys that are rising sophomores or guys that have transferred in, it just looks like this group just has so much more experience in terms of snaps played at the collegiate level.
Yep.
Have you noticed just the sense of maturity, and just what does this year's group look like in comparison to maybe where this group was a year ago at this point?
Yeah. So you look at like just the guys who played last year who were freshmen, they got a chance to get a lot of snaps, and they saw a lot of defensive football. So now when they see it again, they're like, okay, I saw this last year. I remember this look. This is how we approach that. So we can move along a little faster with those guys and go to the next phase of things. So, and then you got the older guys like Rashawn. They've seen, and Jakai, they've seen every look known to man. But just getting those younger guys, Kaysen too, like when he got reps last year, those guys have seen different things now. So you can build on that, and it's not level one now. We always say we got to get to level 2, so that's been the advantage of those guys getting those snaps.
All right. There you go. Lonnie Teasley. Thoughts, Joe?
Yeah, I brought up, earlier a little bit of that level 1 to level 2 kind of thing. I think that was huge, right? And that goes for any player, right? From year 1 to year 2, and just shows that too that, I mean, we knew this, but they have a development strategy. I've seen people on Twitter. It's like, it doesn't feel like we have a development strategy for these guys. They do. And they're working hard at it. And also too, I think, he was really complimentary of the freshmen. And I think that kind of just goes with what we've heard, like just a really tight knit group. Really enjoy, playing football with each other. And so I expect that to continue. And that's what you want at bare bone of spring camp for your first, for all these freshman offensive linemen that you brought in. You want to start developing chemistry early so they can stick together and learn how to play with each other when it comes to summer football. So really good stuff out of Lonnie, and, gave us a lot of good stuff.
Well, there's one more comment that I want to bring up from Teasley, because God Loves Comics mentions about Sean Elliott. How many freshmen has Coach Sean Elliott made cry so far? So
Yeah.
wasn't exactly the way I worded that question, God Loves Comics, but I did ask Teasley about working with Coach Elliott so far.
The fan base would be upset if I didn't ask you what it's been like working with Sean Elliott and being able to be around him the llast couple of weeks.
Sean's been a treat. He's high energy. Got a lot of good ideas. He's done it again, like Greg. They've done it a while. Seen a lot of different things, especially in this conference. So it's been good working with him. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Now that is the end with Elliott, or excuse me, with Teasley, as you hear him talk about Sean Elliott there. Some good stuff, and nothing surprises you. I mean, everything that we've heard from other coaches and players this spring. I was here when Sean was an assistant on Muschamp's staff. That was my first year here. That was in 2016. I wasn't here pre-Muschamp era, but the stories I hear from the former players and stuff, I mean, everything is as advertised. Yeah. And obviously this fan base is very aware of Sean Elliott and what he brings to the table. And certainly a lot of people excited that he's back here in the Garnet Black.
Yeah, most certainly, Mike. It was funny talking with like coaches that we would play for, right? I played for Sean Elliott. I don't know if I'd have the mental toughness to make it through summer camp under Sean Elliott. Like I would love to play for a coach that brings that kind of intensity, but and not to say that Sterling Lucas isn't one bad MFer either, but man, oh man, like everything that we've heard about Coach Elliott. He's one intense dude, and playing tight end for that man must be hard. But I mean, you gotta love it, right? Because when Coach cares that much to push you that hard, as a player, you feel it, and you learn to love it eventually.
Let's keep things rolling as we try to wrap this show up in the next couple minutes. Travian Robertson, defensive tackle coach, former Gamecock and captain, met with the media today. Again, it is always great to hear from the assistant coaches that are non-coordinators, because during the course of the season, at least Shane Beamer provides it. Will Muschamp during that tenure didn't have a chance to speak with any of the assistant coaches during season, other than once during preseason camp and then once in the spring. For positional coaches, that's kind of what we get. But it's good. At least you're able to hear from them a little bit. So we had an update on how the defensive tackle room is going along. And obviously, when you look at that room, similar to that edge room, there's a lot of experience. There's a lot of veteran presence there and the talent that they have, but also the depth. And that's one thing in particular that Robertson mentioned today. So here's what Travian Robertson had to say today during his media availability.
What's it been like for you now that you're going through a spring practice here as a coach? How's that sort of been going for you?
Well, I could tell you since being hired here last year, things are moving fast, but they always say your second year, things kind of slow down. And I'm getting settled finally, so getting to know the guys better. Being able to teach them technique in the spring and going through the spring is good for me so far. I think the players like it too.
Travian, we were talking with Sterling Lucas just a little while ago, and it seems like not just that edge room, but the defensive tackle room just has a lot of experience in it. What has the process been like this spring? Do you feel like you're kind of ahead in terms of some of the teachings, maybe than, in years past at other schools when you were in the spring? I know, like you said, you weren't here last spring.
Yeah, so right now, we got a lot of, guys that got experience up front. And so it's helpful, having transfers coming in. You got some walk-ons, some freshmen. And so being able to have those guys out there to teach and help line them up and coach has been good. So just experience always helped the team. So having Tonka, Boogie, TJ, all those guys play a lot of football. And then you got Dylan coming in. You got a lot of young guys, and, Jules and Kales, those guys are new. So just having both guys, on the field, helping those young guys out. So it's been good so far. It's been really good.
Yeah, kind of going off that, how big has it been to have a guy like Tonka Hemingway back in the room, and what are you seeing from him in the early parts of the spring here?
It's been good. It's been a blessing, when Tonka announced that he was coming back for another year. It's been real good having him back. Tonka don't talk much, but he leads by example. So just having him in. So we just told Tonka just go out there and play ball and lead these guys this year. So we already know what he can do, know how physical he can play. We know how athletic Tonka is, but now it's just leaving this place better than what he found it.
Coach, you brought up Dylan Stewart. What have you seen from him on the outside, and is there any chance, he could get some reps in the middle?
Well, right now he's just gonna, Sterling doing a great job. So he's working on his get off and just getting the playbook down pat. So once he get his main position down, then we'll start seeing other things what we can do with him. But Dylan is an athlete. He can move inside, can move outside. But right now we just learning the playbook right now for Dylan. So he's gonna be a great athlete for us coming off the edge.
Obviously, with the transfer portal, it's tough to know exactly who's going to be in your room every year.
Right.
How big of a relief was it to know that TJ, Tonka, Boogie were all coming back, and how much a part of those conversations were you of making, just kind of checking in with them to see were they coming back or not?
The biggest thing was just building a relationship with those guys. I wasn't, I'm excited they came back, but I felt great about it because the relationship that I built with them in the time that I was here. And so just to have all Tonka, Boogie, and TJ back this year, it's going to be huge for our defense, huge for our program. And I was excited. And like I said, just to have those guys back and have more depth where they can teach. And their whole job this year is just leave this place better than when they found it, because, they are great players, great kids. We love them. But, our time always come to an end. So I'm just telling them, enjoy this year, and we'll revisit everything towards the end of the year.
Seems like TJ really blossomed and stepped into his own last year. Just wanted to ask, what were the signs of progress you kind of saw in his game last year? And going into this season, where do you see him kind of improving his game and further developing it?
Well, TJ ability to move. He was known as a basketball player, so he has great ability to move real good. So now it's just getting stronger. And I just told him his job is now to be a professional, perfect his craft. Going through the spring, being a leader, and so with him just perfecting what he already does good now, just master it.
With the dynamic of doing the 4-down and 3-down stuff and how that maybe affects who you and Sterling are actually coaching, like which players are working and where, how does that go for you? What's sort of your perspective on that whole thing and what all comes with it?
What you say that again?
When you're doing the 4-down stuff and you got
Mhm.
guys who are maybe playing inside or whatever, then you go 3-down and maybe have a guy who can slide outside or vice versa, whatever the case may be. How does that kind of change things for you, or does it change things for you?
It really don't change. We kind of coach the guys to learn multiple positions. So it really don't change my perspective or anything. How we do it 3-down or 4-down. We just talk it up and make sure we're on the same page and make sure we got the right guys on the field. So if we got a 4-down package, we'll make sure we got the best guys on the field. If we got a 3-down package, we're gonna make sure we got the best guys on the field. So it don't really change my mindset or what we do. We just make sure we're on the same page of having the right guys on the field for those packages.
Kind of following up on that a little bit, you have a lot more depth in this room now this year, and Coach Lucas talked about like hockey shifts in terms of his rotation.
Mhm.
What does your substitution or rotation strategy kind of look like? And I know you mentioned the 3rd and 4th down package.
Well, right now we're just trying to get most of the new guys and the younger guys reps. So I'm just rotating as I see fit. There's no really magic secret to it. It's just making sure it's a spring ball, so make sure everyone get reps. And once we get to the fall, we'll start planning out. But right now, everyone's getting coached the same. Everyone's getting pretty much the same. So we don't, in the spring, we're not looking at 1s, 2s, and 3s. We're making sure everybody get good quality reps right now.
Trayden Robertson, South Carolina's defensive tackle coach, meeting with the media today. And you heard intern Joe there asking at the end. And Joe, I'm glad you did, because certainly when we talk about the pass rush, we're talking about being able to get to the quarterback more, even just creating tackles for a loss, never mind pass rush, just being able to be disruptive in the backfield in general, even in the run game. Being able to have fresher legs up front is something that South Carolina desperately needs. Now, when you go back to last year, I mean, you can look across the board. When you go back to last year, when they got into games late, and we saw it in the Florida game a little bit. We saw it in other games too. We saw it in games that South Carolina won, for crying out loud, that they almost gave away. You look at that. Shoot, was it the Vanderbilt game or Jacksonville State? Excuse me. The pick six by Stone Bland, was that the Jacksonville State?
I think so. Yeah.
I think it was that was against Jacksonville State, November 4th. So even a game like that, South Carolina, you could tell as the game went on, got late, they looked a little gassed. Little is an understatement. But I bring that up because, like you said, Joe, being able to have fresher legs up front is something this team needs. It's something this team needs. Zachary, appreciate that. And if they're able to do, making the comparison to hockey, the hockey shifts. And for those of you that aren't hockey fans and don't know exactly what that means, essentially what that means is in hockey, as Joe mentioned earlier, you're only on the ice for about a minute, if that, could be a little more. Sometimes it's a little less. And you're just going out there and you're going balls to the wall. You're giving everything you have for that short burst. And when we think of football, certainly there's a lot of opportunities like that, because when you really break things down, the number of plays that are actually played, it's a 60-minute game, but how many of those seconds are you actually in full balls to the wall mode? So being able to have that luxury of repping more guys out there, getting fresher bodies out there, it's great, but I'm thinking more so deeper into games. So that's where it could be really beneficial for this team. Joe, to wrap things up, let's hit some ads. It is tax season, and our friends over at Liberty Tax, I'm sure they are getting swamped this time of the year.
Yeah, Mike, absolutely. No better people to go to than our good friends over at Liberty Tax. Taxiety is an uncertain feeling you get right before doing tax, but you don't have to go through it alone. Tax team at Liberty Tax in Irmo, Lexington, and Columbia will walk you through the process. Clear up any confusion and guarantee you'll get the biggest possible refund or your money back. Tax time, if you're in a hurry for your refund, call on the tax team at Liberty Tax. They're fast, accurate, and guaranteed. On the other hand, if you think you might be your own Uncle Sam, talk to the Liberty Tax team. Make sure you're not paying more than you should owe. They'll find every possible deduction for you. Locally owned and operated, staffed by tax professionals from your neighborhood. Open 9 to 9 on weekdays and 9 to 5 on Saturdays with multiple service stations. Start through the Liberty Tax mobile app or through the desktop portal. Make an appointment or just walk in. Give a call to upload your tax documents. And when you come in, your return will be ready to review and sign. Give them a call on your screen right now. And for those listening, 803-462-5576. Once again, on your screen right now. And for those listening, 803-462-5576 for all of your tax needs this tax season, Mike.
And today's show is also brought to you by our good friend Clint.Hammond over at the Movement Mortgage. Trying to find a home right now, trying to find the lowest rate in the market, just trying to make that process easier for you and your loved one. Or maybe it's just you. I don't know. Give Clint a call. He can help you out. He'll pick up that phone call for you, and he can make that process much easier, the same way he did for our very own Wes Mitchell when it was time to purchase a home, or former Gamecock quarterback and captain Perry Orth. He also called Clint. That number, 803-771-6933. Final thoughts, Joe, before we wrap up this Thursday edition of GC Live Afternoon Drive.
No, not a whole lot, Mike. Appreciate you letting me, crash or do a little guest spot on this show. Didn't have a whole lot going on this afternoon, and obviously I was at Pressers, so figured I'd come in, help you out a little bit, and obviously really good stuff from the coaches. If you missed this show, we went over quite a bit, so go back, check it all out on the Gamecock Central YouTube page. Like, subscribe, the whole drill.
I think final thoughts for me are heading into this Saturday. I think we're going to start to see at least the beginning of some type of separation at some positions. I think quarterback is going to be interesting because, to me, even though, and I know you feel the same, even though we feel like Lenore Sellers will be the week 1 starter, what I'm hoping for come Tuesday when Shane Beamer speaks, is that Robbie Ashford, guys like even Davis Bevel, even Dante Reno, Luke Doty, guys are looking good behind him. I don't need to remind this fan base of what took place back in 2021, the musical cheers that happened at quarterback. You guys remember that, okay? So I bring that up because if any fan base understands the importance of having depth at that position in particular, it's South Carolina fans. But to even piggyback off that, you need to have someone really challenge to be the guy. And if Sellers is going to be the guy, having someone that can really push him to make sure that he keeps that spot, and not just keeps that spot, but improves week in and week out, you want that. If Robbie Ashford comes out and he balls out, and we're talking about him on Tuesday saying, man, all the reports, everyone that was there, everyone saying the same thing, Robbie Ashford, man, look out. That's great. That's phenomenal. That's exactly what you hope to hear. Because not only should that light a fire underneath Sellers' butt, but it's also going to say, hey, you know what? This competition's a little bit closer than people think. So it would be awesome if Sellers goes out, balls out, but I'm also looking for a number 2 guy. You need that number 2. We've talked about it. If you don't get that from a guy like Ashford for whatever reason, or Reno or Bevel, don't write off Luke Doty. Don't write off Luke Doty getting more reps at quarterback. They certainly would like for him to play wide receiver, and that's another position I think we want to hear some good things about, which guys are starting to slowly separate themselves this spring. Because the spring game itself, people, I've said this to you. Shane Beamer said it year 1, and I'll ask him again leading into this year's spring game. What you see come April 20th in that garnet and black spring game, that will not tell us everything that took place this spring. Jay Urich had like over 100 yards receiving a couple years ago in a spring game. Jay Urich wasn't going out there as the one of the top receivers for the Gamecocks. We love Jay, but that wasn't the case. So what you see in the spring game, that's only a small sample. Some coaches could care less about what happens in the spring game other than how do you respond. Statistically speaking, I think it was DJ Twitty, maybe a year ago or 2 years ago, he balled out in the spring game. And that's not to say guys balling out in the spring game, that's not a good thing. Obviously that is. But these scrimmages, the whole body of work, the entire spring, all 15 practices, not just one, which is the spring game, but the 14 prior to that, especially this 8th practice coming up, which is the inter-squad scrimmage. How do guys respond once they go out there and they're inside of Williams-Brice Stadium? So looking forward to hearing how that game went or how that game goes when we have a chance to be able to talk to Beamer on Tuesday. If you missed any of our show today, head on over to the Gamecock Central YouTube page where you can subscribe for free. And you can also hit that little bell icon. So anytime one of these GC live shows pop up, whether it's me, whether it's intern Joe, whether it be Jack doing baseball, basketball updates, Wes and Chris hopping on as well, you'll get notified right to your phone. And you can also watch it if you have the YouTube app on your smart TV. Pop it up. Put us on the big screen. Might have to look at our ugly mugs. Apologize for that. Or if you don't want to look at our ugly mugs, we also are on podcasts too. You can also listen to us on the Gamecock Central Podcast Network, but you can also subscribe there for free as well. If you want to go back, you want to listen to more of what these Gamecock assistant coaches had to say today, head on over to Gamecock Central. It's free. You're able to go back, get a recap of what the coaches said. Also have links. We're going to get those links up immediately so you guys are able to go back and listen to anything that they said as well as anything else you want. Dawn Staley, she spoke today out in Cleveland. Chris Wellbond is out there for Gamecock Central. We'll have you covered there. And a busy weekend coming up for the Gamecocks as they get set to host Texas A&M on the Diamond. Top 5 team. Believe the Aggies are number 3. Looking for a bounce back this weekend after a tough loss last night for USC on the Diamond. He's intern Joe. I'm Mike. You appreciate everyone that tuned in today. We'll do it again on Tuesday. Enjoy your weekend, folks.